Donald Trump, billionaire, former reality TV star, president. Depending on who you speak to, you're going to get a different answer about who Donald Trump is. Now, in the political world, there's two pretty much opposite reactions people have. Some see Trump as a far right-wing actor with nefarious intentions. Others see him as just a narcissistic fool. But I want to go into some detail and find out who is Donald Trump. Will the real Donald Trump please stand up? Because this question of is Donald Trump really far right, it is a fascinating one. Now we've done one of these dummies guides before, but I think it's worth doing one on Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump actually far right? Yeah, is he actually far right? Now we'll look at the case for, we'll look at the case against, and then I'll give a verdict in the end. And I invite you as well to give me your verdict in the comment section. But don't type yet. Don't just type far right because you think he is. Give it some time. Now, I think it's important to just take a look at the Trump timeline. So I did some work to really figure out, okay, well, if we had to pick moments, right, throughout Trump's long history, I mean, we're talking about the oldest sitting president, I mean, his long history, what are some key highlights that could stand out, right? Now, this quick tour through Trump's history, I think will show you he didn't just randomly burst onto our screen. He grew up in a family that was well known in New York City. And so a lot of people have known about Trump for a long, long time. But in the 1980s, he was this flashy New York real estate mogul, right? He was building his brand, casinos, high rises. He was slapping his name, Trump, that brand on everything. And even though many people didn't really know what he did, they recognized that Trump name. Now, behind all this success, there were some very questionable business practices even then. For instance, in 1973, the Justice Department sued his company because at that time, it found out through an investigation that Trump was refusing to rent to black homes. That was puzzling. In 1989, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of the Central Park Five, 5 black and Latino teens who were wrongly convicted of a crime that they didn't commit. Now, at this time, and there's a whole documentary on this on Netflix. There's been a film, I think a series adaptation of this. He had no reason to do this, but he took out this full-page ad. And even after they became the exonerated 5, because they didn't commit the crime, he didn't apologize and say that this was a mistake. He sort of left it there. Now, the 2000s, in fact, before we go there, it's important to note that these moves weren't really framed in a political context back then, right? So there was no through line you could draw of an ideology at that time. But of course, I think they were foreshadowing a pattern, because essentially what those early experiences show is that Trump has always been known to tap into racial anxieties for attention. So if something's going to get him into the news, Trump is going to do that. And that was the case back then. Now, in the 2000s, this is where we saw Trump, the sort of reality TV star. So he sort of pivoted from business. A lot of people were running his businesses, and now he was a reality TV star. And he became a household name. And this is really where I got to know Donald Trump. It was during The Apprentice. Now, at this stage, he was very politically ambiguous, because he was cozying up to Democrats, he was cozying up to Republicans, he was donating to Hillary Clinton, he was hosting Al Sharpton at his wedding. Now, he had all these different sort of moves that made it really hard to find out exactly who he was, because he was playing politics like a business person with no clear ideology. It was really about whatever works, whoever's going to make me popular, whatever advances my career an iota or to the next rung. Now, the next big thing that happens, I think, in his journey, of course, is in 2011, where we could talk about the birther movement. And essentially, this is where things start to take a turn, because Trump starts to lead this very bizarre campaign questioning Barack Obama's citizenship, right? And this move gained him credibility with the far right, because, of course, this is something they've always touted, that he's some foreign Muslim that's trying to destroy America. And so it really put Trump on the map in the far right world. Famously, I think it's David Duke, the Grand Master of the KKK, was impressed by this, supported this. And this is where I think Trump started to kind of realize the kind of political force he had, because now he was able to galvanize people, demanding Obama would show his birth certificate, leading groups of folks online, demanding this, so on and so forth. Now, if we move into 2016 and beyond, he now formally enters the political arena, and the rhetoric shifts drastically, right? He starts talking about building a wall, the Muslim ban. In Charlottesville, there's this comment he made, which people say was taken out of context, and he actually meant the auto. But the point is, he still said those words, and away from the context point, I do think a fair reading of that was those were incendiary remarks when he said find people on both sides, etc. So suddenly, even though he never formally accepted leadership, at this stage, it became clear that Trump is the leader, if you like, of the right wing of America, at least sort of center right. But I think increasingly the far right as well, they found sort of bedfellows in Trump. Now let's look at the case for Trump being a far right sort of actor. The evidence is pretty damning, I would say. We have his immigration policies. When he first came in, he was talking about the Muslim bans. He was talking about family separations at the border. He had this anti-immigrant rhetoric, which essentially are far-right talking points. Now, he may have had genuine concerns about immigration, sure. But it was quite odd because, of course, he never said this back in the days. He never said this, when he was cozying up to Democrats. But he adopted these talking points, and the way and the phrases he was using, right, talking about these people and the enemy and floods and invasions, words like this frame people, quite frankly, of a different race, of a different ethnicity, as enemies and potential threats. Even when you consider that America is literally a country of immigrants. Now, does this mean there should be no laws? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying he started to use these sort of far right-wing talking points. And so if you're using far right-wing talking points, I think it's fair for people to think, hey, maybe this guy's far right. Two is all these endorsements by extremists. Now, this I have a problem with, of course, because if randomly the KKK retweeted my tweet, doesn't mean I support the KKK. I mean, I can't stop someone from retweeting my tweet, granted. But if every far right-wing actor starts to organize and support me, you have reason to scratch your head and go, what's going on here? And that's what happened with Trump. The Proud Boys, other nationalist groups started to see him as this guy and embrace him, right? And he equally started giving them dog whistles. You'll famously remember him saying to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, essentially get ready. And they listened to him. You remember the Proud Boys who were part of this insurrection on the Capitol. When he told them to stop, that's when they dispersed and went home. So you see this affinity and this relationship between him and far right-wing groups. And again, it's hard for him to then say, well, I don't know anything about it. Well, like, how come you keep saying things and they listen to you? And they keep affirming you in public. And they keep endorsing you. Something odd is going on there. The third thing I think is that Trump has what I would call authoritarian leanings. And this means, or this is, again, something that's cut out of the cloth of far right-wing activists. One is him refusing to obviously concede. Two is him not committing to a peaceful transfer of powers. This is one of the linchpins of American democracy or democracy anywhere. But he was asked multiple times during the elections, right, during the debates, are you going to commit? And he's like, well, we'll see what happens if I win. All these different things he said, of course. We've seen him encouraging insurrectionists, right? We've heard him saying things like he wants to be a president like Xi Jinping of China, which again, these are all authoritarian leanings that again are akin to what you see in far right-wing politics. And of course, the fourth thing I think is he's rolling back of civic right. He's rolling back of civic right protections. From weakening protections against marginalized group to pushing for patriotic education, for replacing discussions around systemic racism and kind of downplaying the place of racism or anything like that. He's aligned himself with the cultural priorities of the far right. And this is the issue, right? Is that some of it you go, Trump is half joking, he's trolling, sure. But when you take those four things together, you see a pattern where he shows a strong affinity for those on the far right. Okay, so that's a case against him. But let's look at a case that maybe challenges some of this. And by the way, I'm fair-minded in this way. I've always thought of, well, I can see both sides, for another better term. The other argument, I think, is that Trump actually isn't far right, but he's just an opportunist. And this I'm inclined to believe as well. Because again, if you look at his pre-political views, they were all over the place. When he had no spotlight, when he had no reason to perform, he did all sorts of things. He supported universal healthcare. He was pro-choice, and then he flipped into being pro-life. And he only did that when it became politically convenient. He openly praised Bill and Hillary Clinton in the early 2000s. He was saying they're great people, what they're doing is amazing. Famously supported the Clinton Foundation. Now they're enemies of the people, lock her up, they're corrupt. You kind of go, this is odd. You were celebrating them a minute ago, right? Those for me show me that there isn't really a through line in this man's political identity, but he just does whatever he thinks is expedient at the time. Second is that his economic policies are far more populist than they are conservative, right? So traditional far right-wing parties often favor small government. That's what they're known for, right? Trump, however, increased the government spending as opposed to cuts for social security programs. So actually, his behavior isn't that of a sort of small c conservative or even a libertarian. The government grew under Trump, right? And so you kind of go, well, if that's happening, it's hard to say he's far right, because far right parties, if they got it, or far right presidents, sorry, if they got in place, would definitely cut, and not in the same way he's done. The third thing is, if you look at Trump, and again, I'm someone who's observed Trump so much, there is no clear ideology. Unlike actual far right-wing parties that work really hard to ensure there's a sort of through line and their beliefs are systemized. So when you look at people like Tucker Carlson, you look at people like Steve Bannon in the US context, they are clear right-wing actors. Some would say far right, but right-wing actors. Trump doesn't seem to hold to any ideological belief. You know, he shifts his positions based on what's popular to his base, based on whether he feels offended or not, you know. My undergraduate degree thesis was on far right-wing parties in Europe. My master's thesis was on far right-wing parties in the UK, in Europe, and also in the media. I started my PhD looking at far right-wing parties and extremism. So I've spent quite a lot of time reading academic literature around far right-wing parties, and it seems as though what a lot of those parties are really interested in is this idea of like almost like a theological purity. Right, there's this idea that their belief comes from on high, and it's important that those beliefs are systemized and are kept intact. Whereas Trump doesn't seem to care at all about any through line. He just does whatever is expedient to him in the time, which is, I think, a pretty strong case for him not being far right. And I think the other thing about Trump, call him what you want, he is fundamentally a businessman, and he seems to have a business-first approach, which is not consistent, again, with far right-wing ideology. His presidency prioritized corporate gains over hardcore nationalist policies, right? He praised black unemployment rates during his presidency, something I don't think a far right-wing party leader really would, because race would be something that they wouldn't, I mean, that kind of racial achievement for black people is not something they would do. So those are four reasons. I think it's kind of hard to put him squarely and say he is far right. Now I've given you 8 different things there. You might go, this is more persuasive than that one. That's fine. My overall verdict is, okay, so is Trump far right? Well, I think Trump is a narcissistic opportunist who says whatever he's going to say to keep himself in the spotlight. I think that's the best reading of Trump, is that he's a narcissistic, very self-absorbed person, very dense, very thin-skinned, and he's addicted to popularity and being seen as great and going down in history and legacy and these sort of things. And that's the best reading. I think the worst reading of Trump is that he's actually been co-opted. Like actual far right-wing actors have taken his naked opportunism, they've co-opted it, and they've kind of branded him as the perfect figurehead for their movement. Essentially, this is an empty vessel. So they're like, excellent. As an empty vessel, and this is, I think, what Steve Miller sort of salivates over, as this empty vessel, let's just put our ideas in him and drive it through that way. Because right now, in the cultural zeitgeist, right-wing sort of populism and sort of far right policies, they sort of meet at this concentric circles where they're kind of singing from the same hymn book. And so in that sense, they're like, oh my gosh, Trump is the perfect conduit for this. And so I think that's the best reading of Trump. So I don't think he believes in anything enough to call him seriously far right wing. However, I think he believes in himself enough, and he's narcissistic enough and dense enough for a far right wing actor to co-opt him and use him to achieve their aims. So I don't think he's a true believer. I think he's a political grifter. And I think he's being used, right? When I look at him, I don't see a man who's generally filled with hatred and wants all black people to be subjugated and believes in like a very, I don't see that. I don't. I see someone married ultimately to their advancement. And I think some far right-wing actors have definitely been they've been successful in grabbing him and essentially mobilizing him to do their will. Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comment section. What do you think? Is Trump far right? I mean, what other things have I missed out that you'd say is concrete case or proof rather that he is far right or that he isn't? I'd love to explore and see what some people are thinking. But those are my thoughts generally. And if you've enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button, share this, subscribe if you haven't done so. We're on the journey to 10,000 subscribers. We would love your help. And of course, comment. I really want to talk to some of you about what you think. Speak soon.